Welcome back. I hope that it was an easy task for you to match these stages and ages with the development of a early years child. It is something that we've been revisiting a lot over this course. So I hope hopefully that was a quick review and puts that information into your mind as you are starting to learn more about spatial awareness and understanding where the children are that you work with, at what stage are they at, and what you can expect, and then knowing what's coming next. That way we can support that in their development. We're going to start with spatial awareness. Spatial awareness is the ability to be able to walk through a space and not run into tables, not run into door frames as we're going in and out of doors, as we understand where our body is. It also shows up when it comes into balancing, being able to ride a skateboard, skiing if you happen to be a skier, or surfing if you are a surfer, not having to see the wave behind you, but knowing where that might be in relationship to your body and whether or not it's going to crash into you. And there is a lot of sensory perception that goes on inside of the human brain and body to be able to understand that and to keep ourselves safe. It's when we're walking down the sidewalk, we can automatically step over cracks. Sometimes we'll get a little off balance, but then we're able to quickly recover. When we're stepping off a curb, we know approximately how far that's going to be down, or going up and down stairs. We don't necessarily need to look at the stairs as we're going down those stairs. The definition of spatial awareness is defined as the ability to perceive a spatial relationship in respect to the orientation of one's body despite distracting information. So that ability to move around a classroom, look at a child, listen to something that's going on over here, and then not run into a table or trip over toys that happen to be on the floor in your path. Or, God forbid, step on a child that as they're all moving around. Children often will run into tables and run into people because they're still getting comfortable with this idea of where their body is in space. It consists of being able to perceive visually, understand outside spatial information such as features, properties, measurements, shapes, positions, and motions. This begins in the womb as the body starts to organize itself. So I've got a quick video to show you about how the inner utero development happens, and then a little bit of a conversation at the end on the spatial awareness and how that comes into being. So I hope you liked the video. Now we're going to talk a little bit about moving our body intentionally. We use body language all the time. I talk with my hands, and when I'm presenting in person, I'm bouncing around, and when I'm on video, I try to sit very still and not put my hands in front of the camera because that does convey a message. So strategies for conveying a message with our actual body comes in many different ways. If we were in a face-to-face, we would start shouting out about this, so I'm just going to go through some of the ones that I came up with. First, we have our body language to convey a message. Stop. I don't like it. That's one of the things that I use when talking to children inside of a classroom. And then we have sign language. People who are unable to communicate with their voice will use signs, but we also do them within our culture. We have this, which means wait. This is like wait, wait, and you will see many people inside of our culture do that. But there's also stop, and then there's this, which is no, 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 and shaking our head. And then we have the traditional ones for more and help. Those are based on the American Sign Language system. And then we have clapping. That usually says, yay, we're happy. That conveys a message using our body. And waving, bye-bye, or hello. Oh, hey, I see you over here. Look at me. So we do have waving that happens. And we have no. We've already talked about that. An interesting one about no is that there are many different ways based on the culture that you are in what no looks like. Where I grew up, no was very much like this. And now, where I'm living now, no is like this. And so it's very interesting if you will ask a child, you will ask them if they want something and they go like this, that's actually telling you no, which was something I didn't know when I was first inside, when I first moved into the culture that I'm currently in, inside of Israel. So I didn't really understand that that's what this meant. And then I used context clues around everything because I would have thought it was a shrug, like, I don't know. But it's actually not I don't know, it's no. And then my final one that I put on the list down there was interpretive dance. This can then conveying a message. There are people that do modern dance, and when they are dancing and they're moving their body in a particular way, that is absolutely conveying a message. So let's talk a little bit about what we can expect from typical movement development in gross motor. It starts with laying and intentionally moving our arms and legs, rolling over, then crawling, then walking, then running, then jumping, then climbing, and balancing. And inside of that, other skills will develop, which is the ability to play football, the ability to ride a bike, the ability to surf. So all of that happens in a systematic pattern, and they can happen simultaneously. There are some children that I swear skip walking and go right to running, but they do eventually do walking. And jumping is with 2 feet, and it can look a little off balance. If you've ever watched a toddler jump, it's very sweet, and then becomes very organized with intentional jumping over objects. Developing coordination, strength, and control in large muscle groups. That's what that gross motor development looks like. Fine motor skills is the grasping of objects, manipulating toys, using utensils, and buttoning clothing, and then eventually writing. It's the development of dexterity and eye-hand coordination and the precision of very small muscles. And those are the ones that happen inside of our fingers, but also inside of our toes. Some people have the ability to pick things up with their feet. Motor milestones are a sequential development of motor skills, such as lifting the head, sitting up, and standing, and then walking. And the progression goes from very simple and to becoming very complex. That going back to that interpretive dance, that's very complex physical movement. So now we're going to talk a little bit about movement development in toddlerhood, which is really 18 to 36 months, but this starts in the early years and from birth, or as we saw in the video, in utero, and goes all the way through life. So it continues to evolve, and as an adult, I learned how to practice yoga. And think about a time when you were learning to do something new with your body and how challenging that was. I try to remember that when I'm looking at children becoming frustrated with the ability to move their body, or they become very sad when they fall off of something because they've lost their balance. And I try to remember that it is scary and not fun to lose your balance. This is Should I Be Worried? This is a short video about physical development and when to be concerned about what's happening inside of physical development. And welcome back. I hope that was informative to you in what to be on the lookout for and how sometimes behaviors can appear to be something that is atypical, but is actually typical. And we are not diagnosticians, so it's really not up to us to make that final determination. But if something does in your gut, or you do have a concern, have someone else take a look and have a conversation with the parents if they're noticing it, what the pediatrician might say about that. And then if you notice something that's just really not tracking with what we understand development to be, then that's the time to get outside information with the permission of the parents. So now we're going to talk a little bit about dexterity, and that refers to the fine motor movement coordination and control of movements, that ability to button, pick something small up off the floor. It involves manipulating objects, the ability to sew, or to be able to put something together, small Legos, being able to put them together to have a creation. It also plays a crucial role in cognitive and physical development and supporting skills like problem solving and creativity. Playing piano, that can be creative. Sewing can be creative. Handwriting can be creative. Painting can be creative. Collage can be creative. So it also allows us to be able to express ourselves with the actual handwriting or typing, and it allows us to take in information. There has been some studies done, and I don't have it linked here, but there has been some studies done about how the importance of using actual physical handwriting when taking notes. And I'll have that available for you at the end. There is another article that I want to share with you, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this and the importance of it, and the article will be linked. It was done by the BBC, and it was a study that was done in the UK about how surgeons now need remedial sewing classes because they're not getting that development in their early years. And so for a surgeon to be able to close a body with stitches or with staples, or to even be able to use the fine tools to be able to manipulate, that requires a lot of pincer grasp, even if they are doing remote surgery with and they're using orthoscopic surgery, where they are putting tools in and manipulating inside the body to be able to visualize what's happening and make the fingers make those movements. And adults are no longer having that skill innately. It's missing from the early years practice. And so they're now having to have remedial sewing classes to be able to participate in their chosen profession. So something to keep in mind as we are early years practitioners is ensuring that our children do get even just the foundation of that fine motor movement of being able to sew, threading, stringing beads, that really fine, detailed work that we use with our fingers. Not just putting blocks together, but putting small beads on a string is not so easy. And there are many people that don't know how to sew a button. You can have button sewing. 5-year-olds can sew buttons onto burlap, and it's really wonderful activity. And at times they will put together and they will make shapes, and they can put them onto sock puppets if you want to make them on sock puppets. And that's a way to introduce that fine motor sewing in a way that children might enjoy. The typical movement development, an overview of the characteristics of that: age-related progression. The motor abilities gradually improve with age and experience, and its early development focuses on basic movements, while later development focuses on the refined movement. We know that in an infant environment, children lay on their backs and their tummies, and we put things in front of them, and they're just reaching and grabbing, or they're laying on their back and they're kicking their feet, and that can eventually become organized to kicking a ball. Also, the ability for bilateral coordination is the ability to use both sides of your body together, such as crawling or even using scissors, which is interesting that you need bilateral coordination to be able to use scissors, because you're holding in one hand and you're cutting with the other. And the development of a dominant hand for skilled tasks does come about in the early years. It is, once a child does start to show preference for one hand or the other, it is important that we as early years practitioners still offer opportunities. If you notice somebody is, for instance, always grabbing for things on the right, then set it to their left. And if they are really wanting to always reach across, then you can hand it to them with your left hand and demonstrate things with your left hand. And rhythm sticks are wonderful, being able to develop both hands together for drumming and using a rattle in both hands. And so they get that exercise for both hands. Motor planning and execution is the ability to plan and carry out coordinated movements. Oh, I want to go from here to there, and I want to ride a bimba. So it's knowing walking over to the bimba, they'd be able to climb over it, and then either pedal or use their feet to move that bimba to go forward. It's an increasing ability to imitate and perform more complex actions. Children see people on bikes and they want to ride bikes. We introduce those to them, and it does seem to be innate inside of a child that they know to get on it and move it with their feet. And being able to do that then can lend itself to a lot of other activities later in life. And it starts with this very early on of being able to have these foundational skills that we get to watch and support. Bilateral coordination, the ability to coordinate both sides of the body in a synchronized fashion. It involves tasks utilizing both hands, both feet, such as crawling, walking, jumping, and using scissors. Bilateral coordination skills are essential for everyday things like writing, buttoning clothes, and playing sports. And anyone that needs to go through any sort of remedial development, if they in adulthood, if something has, God forbid, happened to them, one of the things that they go back to are these very basic skills. And I had a friend of mine who was in a car crash, and she was bedridden for a while, and so she went to physical therapy. And one of the things that she had to learn, that she had to demonstrate that she could do for graduating from physical therapy, is to make scrambled eggs. And she's like, I don't like scrambled eggs. I'm never going to make scrambled eggs. But what it was taking the egg, it was cracking it, opening it, putting it in a bowl, holding the bowl and stirring, then pouring that into a pan, and then flipping it over with a spatula. And those were all skills that she needed to demonstrate for self-sufficiency. And I always remember that when I'm talking about early childhood. Where are we trying to get these children to? We're trying to get them to be able to cook their own eggs. And it's having all of those skills, and that does require bilateral coordination. The typical movement development with play and exploration. Children engage in various activities to learn and develop these motor skills. I gave the example earlier of the Bimba. This helps refine their coordination, balance, and spatial awareness. It's part of the reason why we want to make sure that children are getting out and having big open space, garden time, or playground time, depending on where you are. Even walking from the school to a playground is a part of supporting that typical development for coordination, balance, and spatial awareness. And this does vary from individuals. There is a range of development. As looking back at the video of is this normal, it does come in, sometimes it looks to be a little bit disorganized children who go from walking very quickly and then they have to go back and walk a little bit slower. So it can look a little bit disorganized, but watching very closely, you can see how it happens just little by little, step by step. And there are factors such as genetics and environment and opportunities for movement that influence motor development. And this goes back to this desire of being and need as early years practitioners to have parks and big open spaces for them to experiment. And even inside of a smaller environment that's indoors for our infants, having multi-leveled and different textured surfaces for the children to move across. Even if they're just belly scooting or scooting on their tush, they're going to get a little bit of an up and down with that, and it feels different and with their hands and with their feet. And having a triangle structure, the one that's most commonly used is a Pickler triangle, and they come in different varieties. They generally are wooden, and they have rungs on one side, and sometimes they will have a more flat surface on the other with the hole in the middle for them to be able to climb into, and then it can become a hideout of sorts, which is a really also excellent activity for children that gives them a space for timeout, and they can move inside of that. There are people who live in environments and they have not been given the opportunity to move their bodies. And the research that came out of Russia with the orphanages, and they just did not have enough care providers, and the children spent a lot of time in cribs, and then they noticed that there was a deficit in their physical development. When I was in South Africa, there was a situation that I wasn't really aware of, that I actually didn't really give much thought to until I was there, and we had a campaign of Face Your Baby Out, because many of the children would have been carried on their backs and their heads were facing sideways all the time. And what happened was there was a deficit in their depth perception because that didn't develop early on. And so when you would throw something at them, they weren't really sure how to catch that. When they were learning to drive cars, it was difficult for them to understand that forward facing. And so there was a campaign to get children facing forward and to give them the opportunities to be in swings so that they could practice that depth perception. And this also, it's an integration with all the other domains. Motor skills are interconnected with cognitive, social, and emotional development. I know from my own experience with a child who has been limited with their physical development for any reason. It could be that they needed to have surgery when they were younger. The one that I'm most familiar with was a little girl who had to have surgery because she was pigeon-toed, and she spent her early years in braces, and she learned to move around those braces. However, as she got older, I got her after she was starting to walk, is when she joined my community. She had a very low tolerance for frustration when it came to being able to do physical tasks. It did not develop her resilience. It actually made her more annoyed when she could not climb or jump, and she would cry and call out for help. And her physical therapist and her parents and I had to work together in helping her develop that resilience for moving her body, because it hadn't come little by little by little. It was something that came to her a little bit later, and it was frustrating to her. So we had to support her with that. And it also made it very difficult for her to communicate with her peers and engage with her peers and develop those relationships, because she was limited and the children were running away from her and she could not keep up, and the children were in the sensitive period of gross motor, of jumping and moving, and she just wasn't quite there yet. So that really impacted her social and emotional development. It was something she was able to overcome. She's about 13 years old now. Her name is Shelby, and she has a delightful young woman and living her life very happily. And I've continued to keep in touch with her parents and watch her grow. And it's been really lovely to see how she was able to overcome this. And it also reminded me that even if something is happening in early childhood, there is ways to mitigate it later on. Oftentimes they can overcome those challenges. And again, this motor development is overall growth and learning and self-expression, and it's really important that we support that. So now, quick discussion. Talked about Shelby and her needing to have supportive devices, and there are people who have to have supportive devices for movement. But for a typically developing child, do we want to have that? So there's going to be a discussion board. Go and give your thoughts and opinions and hopefully exchange some ideas with others about whether or not children should be using assistant devices, what those assistant devices look like. Again, we're talking about neurotypical and physical typical development in children. So let's take a look at what the experts say about this. And after watching this, let's see if your perspective changes on whether or not assisted devices are not the best thing. So after you've watched the video, please go back into the discussion board and let everyone know whether or not this changed your perception, or are you going to double it down on your opinion.